Okay, in the interest of time, let us start. Welcome again to the Euro Wisdom Forum webinar series. So today's talks will be grouped under the title Multi-Objective Optimization and Fair Allocation. I will just give a short introduction about Euro Wisdom Forum. And then the agenda, and we will proceed with 3 short talks after that. Euro Wisdom Forum aims to support and encourage the participation of all genders in operational research within the Euro societies. And you can find more information on our website. So YoungWomen4OR is an initiative to create visibility and networking opportunities for a group of early career women in operations research. And every year we select 12 women based on their achievements. In our webinar series, we invite 3 speakers from the YoungWomen4OR of this year and a subject matter expert as well. And today's subject matter expert is Professor Gutjahr. We will have 3 talks, first by Valentina Bonomi, then Dilay Aktas Dejaegere, right? Sorry for my pronunciation. Zehra Nazvaro. After the talks, we will have Walter's comments, and the questions and answers will follow after these presentations. Then we will have some free time for networking, for discussions. So I will proceed with introducing Valentina, our first speaker. Valentina is a postdoctoral researcher at the moment at University of Lisbon. She obtained her PhD in information engineering from University of Brescia, Italy. And actually 2 weeks ago, I was at University of Brescia, Valentina. And it's a beautiful place and with strong researchers. Valentina's research focuses on optimization of rich vehicle routing problems with applications in healthcare logistics and sustainable last mile delivery systems. So let me stop sharing and yes, Valentina.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. Okay, so thank you for the presentation, Sibel. As introduced today, I would like to talk about fairness in healthcare, and in particular, how we try to investigate the conflicting goals of stakeholders. We started our investigation from a nurse routing problem. So we try to model an heterogeneous model with requirements from the patient and the nurses, but in a simple way. So meaning that we just need to schedule visits at patient houses, minimizing the total travel time. So this was our starting point. But then we start thinking, how could we switch the focus from the hospital, so from the minimization of the time or the distances or the cost, to the other stakeholders, because a home healthcare system is efficient and it works well only if all the stakeholders are perceive a good environment, so a good quality of care for the patient or a good working environment for the nurses. So we thought on how to prioritize also the needs of the patients or the nurses in a nurse routing problem. We came up with the concept of fairness. So since the patients and the nurses are a group of people, we are trying to be fair in accommodating their needs. And in doing so, we decided to take the traditional model of the nurse routing problem with the objective function of the minimization of the time and to switch through min-max formulation. So usually in literature, when you are talking about fairness, you want to be fair among a set of people or a set elements, you use the min-max formulation. So you are trying to minimize, or max-min, depending on the case. You are trying to minimize the maximum value among this set of, in our cases, nurses or patients. So what we did was take in the problem and simply change the objective function to switch the attention from the hospital to nurses or patients. After deciding how to measure fairness, we had to compute, so we had to decide which fairness measure to use. So we have a set for the nurses, then we will have a set for the patient. On the point of view of the nurses, we are trying to be fair in the workload, so in terms of total time or just the service time, and in the assignment of the visits to the nurses, both from the point of view of the difficulty of the visit, since we have a qualification for each nurse, but also from the point of view of the working zone, because the nurses, we assume that they have, depending on their means of transport, a preferred working zone over the other. For each of these measures, we are giving a KPI or a specific computational specific formula. In this case, here the example is the total time workload. That is the measure that we will put in the min-max formulation. So for example, here we are measuring the total travel time and the total service time, and then we will try to be fair among all our K nurses, for example, in the assignment of this total time workload. From the point of view of the patients, instead, we have three different measures. The first one is the consistency. So patients can require more than one visit, and we assume that they prefer the same nurse will perform the 2 visits. Then we have last service time. So we will try to be fair in the lateness among the patients. And also we are trying to be fair in the qualification of the nurse that will visit the patient. So if they have multiple visits, we will try to meet the expectation of the patients comparing to their expected level of service. Moving to the hospital instead, we cannot talk about fairness measure because here the hospital is one stakeholder. In this case, we tried either way to incorporate in the hospital governance measure the needs of the patients or the nurses with 2 more objective functions. So if the hospitals want to prioritize the patient, we assume that it can try to minimize the total tiredness among all the patients. It's not a fair measure because it's the total, but at least it's a governance that put the focus a little more on the patient. And then we have, from the point of view of the nurses, the time of last visit. So the time in which they are performing, a nurse is performing the last visit. So once we have computed for each stakeholder different measure, we needed to decide which one we would put in our model. So are we optimizing the patients? Are we optimizing nurses? Or even if we decide which one of the measures should we explore? So we came up with a 3 objective formulation where we have a triplet of objective function. In each triplet, there is a function from the hospital, one from the patient, and one for the nurses. And the resolution method that we chosen as a multi-objective is the lexicographic approach, meaning that we are solving hierarchically the problem. And of course, the lowest priority are bounded by the solution found by the higher level priority function. So again, even if we decided to have a 3 objective formulation, how can we decide the order in which we put the stakeholder? And even if we decide the order, how can we choose which function to put from the hospital, from the patient? We didn't. So we compute all the possible permutation of all the possible triplets to have all the possible results depending on the order of the function and on the chosen measure. So we have more than 1,000 of resolutions, and we collected all this data. Then, as I will explain later, we found a winning triplet, let's see, and we use a parallel LNS to solve large size instances. So once we have set one triplet, we try to have multiple LNS working on there is a heuristic approach, so working on this different function, and we were able to solve large size instances. So main research question, as I already said, we tried to see if there were the possibility to find a winning triplet. So is there a combination of function that gives a low trade-off of the function that are not optimized? And then are there some functions that if they are not optimizing first gives worse results than the others, so it's better to keep them at higher levels? And again, we try also to explore the correlation between different stakeholders. So if we cannot optimize, for example, the patients first, is there a significant change in optimizing first the nurses or the hospital for the patients? And of course, lastly, we try to see if our heuristic approach gives good results. We had two sides of instances, so a small set where we did all the qualitative analysis, that is with 20 patients, and then a large set in which we tested our LNS. Starting with the best triplets. So we try to see if there's a correlation in the values that our objective has when another one is optimized in a specific order. So in this case, after solving all the instances, we collected for each measure of its value, post-processing, when objective star is optimized in priority E. So we are considering all the other objectives. This is done inside the same stakeholder in different priority. It's easier with an example. So here, for example, we were trying to evaluate the performances of the hospital. And we can see that, for example, the total travel time measure assume these different values when this objective function is optimized, in this case, in first. Then we will have the same table in second, in third, and the same analysis for the patients and the nurses. This allows us to rank by column the values that a function obtains when another one is optimized. Of course, in priority one, the best is always when it's optimized itself. But we can also see that, for example, when the time of last visit is optimized, the others never have their worst value. In this case, we are able to identify a function that when optimized gives the lowest trade-off of the others, so not so bad results of the other. Summing all the scores from all the priorities, we have the winning triplet. So we can see that for the hospital, the time of last visit was the best one, and with the others, the only remarkable thing is the time function for the nurses. Moving to the switching of priority, of course, those functions that when optimizing first have a value 0, when they are moved to third or second, gives worsening up to the 100%. But this is useful also to see those functions that are in the winning triplet, that when moved of priority don't give the much higher worsening. And just to conclude super quickly, in the interactor correlations, we saw, when a functions cannot be optimizing first. So for example, preferred working zones for the nurses can be first. We saw that the worsening for a nurse function, for example, is always lower when patients are first, meaning that could be a correlation between the function of the nurses and the one of the patient. Talking about the LNS instead, we always match Gurobi in all the small size instances, except 2 cases when the last service time was first. This is because it's a very sensitive objective function. While in the large size instances, we always improve Gurobi with an average gap up to the 66.5%. I hope I stayed in the 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentina.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will introduce our next speaker. Just a second. Okay. Our next speaker is Dilay Aktas Dejaegere. She's a researcher at the KU Leuven Institute for Mobility. She got her PhD in engineering science from the same university in 2024. Her research focuses on data-driven optimization in transportation and logistics at different sectors. Okay, so Dilay, please go ahead.
Yes. Does it work? Can everybody see?
Yes.
You can hear me as well. Okay, great. Thank you for the introduction, and also thank you for the webinar organization. I'm Dilay Aktas Dejaegere, and I know it is a bit complicated to pronounce it, so I really don't even notice the differences. And I should mention that this is an ongoing work, so I'm really looking forward to the discussion afterwards and any suggestions and questions to see. So I'm going to talk about balancing operational costs and service levels in a dynamic environment such as dynamic waste collection. As we all know, waste collection is somewhat of a must, and especially if you think about the municipal solid waste collection, it's really, there is no revenue in it, but it's more about meeting the needs of the public. So it's an essential service. And the main challenge is that it is actually unpredictable because it depends on many, many different factors, such as population density, socioeconomic factors, and the regulations of the cities itself, weather, holidays, etc. So many different factors affect the quantities. And that's why the exact amount of waste to be collected, it's often unknown. So this means that traditionally, the current waste collection systems, they have to somewhat accommodate this uncertainty by having some operational buffers. And these are maybe performing more frequent collections than required, or underutilized vehicle capacities because they have to accommodate some spare capacity in the vehicles due to this uncertainty. Luckily now, recently at least, that we can also see a smart waste collection problem that's been arising. And these kind of problems, they often focus on these large underground bins for a street or a neighborhood. And then these bins that are smart because they are equipped with sensors to measure the weight or the height, weight or the volume of the bin, the trash that's in the bins. There are two ways of doing it. One is continuous sensor reading, but there it should also be considered that there will be higher battery depletion. And also every time there is a reading, sometimes there are also errors that it needs to get processed and then the reliable information should be taken out. So this is somewhat challenging. And on the other hand, it could be interval reading. So we can actually do interval reading for more specific times, like at the beginning of the day or right before optimization, right before deciding on the collection plans. So overall, this new problem, smart waste collection problem, just simply means that we can make use of this sensor data and make more informed decisions for the waste collection. Typically, there are two approaches in the literature. So the first one is a two-phase approach. There, the idea is to first determine a set of bins that has to be visited. So they are often called must-go or critical bins. And then they are typically identified by a threshold. Then the problem reduces to a capacitated vehicle routing problem because then you know the set of bins to visit. So you just need to allocate your vehicles in the best possible way to collect the trash. And the second approach is a multi-period approach. So this time, actually, we can look at the bins together with the routing. So it doesn't necessarily need to be must-go bin today, but if it's expected to overflow in another day, maybe it's more beneficial to include it in the routes already today. So that's why there is the advantage of this looking ahead approach. And then in this case, the decisions are updated in a rolling horizon principle. So here we can say that the problem is more reverse inventory routing problem. What we assumed in our, and what we did in our study, so we considered the multi-period approach, and for the moment we have a mixed integer program for this problem. We assume that we have sensor readings available at the beginning of the day, but this still means that we are trying to decide it for a multi-period, but we still have the uncertainty for the next days, of course. So the aim is to decide on this collection plan for the given planning horizon, which could be a week or just a couple of next days. Main decisions would be then which bins to empty by which vehicle and on which day, and then what should be the route of these vehicles on each day. We have the typical constraints as the vehicle capacities, the bin capacities, and also here something I should mention. We assume that when we are doing optimization, the only information we have is this sensor readings and also an expected fill rate for each bin that's based on the historical data and the company expertise. But as I mentioned, yeah, the waste quantities, they depend on many different factors, so they do not necessarily need to fit into a predefined distribution. So that's why here we also try to work with limited information that the companies currently have, which is only an expected fill rate for each of these bins. Then we have the typical routing constraints, starting and ending at the depot and no subtours. And also we have a constraint on no partial collection of bins. So once a bin is emptied, it has to be emptied completely. Now I'm going to the objective, and I let it for the last because I will be a bit vague at this point. So our objective and our aim is overall is balancing collection cost and the service levels, and the service levels are measured by the bin overflows. So it is a multi-objective problem by its nature, because if it is to minimize collection cost, then we just don't collect anything, or if it's just to maximize service level, then we have to collect probably every day, every bin. So these are the two highly conflicting criteria that we need to consider, but at the same time, we are not really interested in compromise solutions where half of the bins are overflowing all the time and then we are only doing half of the routes. So that's why we need to look for the interesting parts of these criteria. And for this, what we did is we considered two optimization perspectives. The first one is to minimize the total collection costs while achieving a minimum acceptable service level. And the second one is to maximize the service level while staying within a specified collection budget. But I should still mention that the tricky part comes both this trade-off and also the dynamic environment and also the stochasticity, because when we optimize this, we are actually optimizing the service level based on our expectation and the most recent sensor reading. So we only know what's going to happen today, really, but we don't know what's going to happen the other days. And this means that when we consider these two criteria and we optimize the service level, the model or any other algorithm that we would use, it will give us that only the bins that are already or expected to overflow within this planning horizon must be visited, because we want to minimize the collection cost as well. So let's call these bins that are already or expected to overflow within this planning horizon as must-go bins. And then what we do is, okay, we optimize, we check, but after we have to evaluate it, the real service level. So then we actually check what happened, what was the realized fill rates, and then we actually observe the realized overflowing bins, and that actually shows our real service level. So this means that there can be some bin overflows that were not foreseen, and this could be either due to the stochasticity, so some fill rates being higher than what we expected, or it could also be just simply the limitation of the planning horizon approach, because we don't see what's happening just even one day after that. So overall, again, going back to these two approaches, because of these reasons, it means that the first optimization perspective, if we solve a mathematical model, if we solve our mixed integer program with this objective in mind, then we will get a solution that collects only the must-go bins to keep the cost minimal, and maybe even not all of those, because we could also allow a certain number of overflows, but there will be only a prioritization of these must-go bins, and then nothing else will be visited because we want to minimize the cost for the planning horizon. And in the second optimization perspective, of course, there we have a limited budget. Then we want to maximize the service level. Again, it would prioritize first emptying the bins that have to be emptied, and then any other if the collection budget allows. But in terms of multi-objective optimization, if we only consider these two criteria, to actually have non-dominated solutions, it would mean that we don't visit any other bin. So for this reason, we actually purposefully allow some dominated solutions in terms of these two criteria, but we also consider a somewhat third criterion, which defines the robustness of the plan, because in order to be able to keep the trade-off that we initially identify for these two criteria, and it's a dynamic environment, we also need to make sure that our plan is not so often and so frequently changed. So that's why we also consider some optional bins. So those bins that are over a certain fill level and that are close by to other bins that are visited, but normally they have no impact on the service level that we have for the current planning horizon. So the two optimization perspectives, if you put them in a little more mathematically formulated, we will have on the first side, the aim is to minimize the overflows, maximize the service level while staying within a minimum allowable service level, then what we do is that we could allow a certain level of overflows of bins, and then we would minimize and highly penalize the overflows that are happening above that. And here the idea is that we do it lexicographically, but just for the simplicity, I put it like this. We could consider this as a very high penalty. And then we have the collection cost, the vehicle kilometer cost, and the vehicle usage cost for each collection. And lastly, these optional bins, how we included them is somewhat an opportunity cost of not visiting a bin that is above a certain level and that is close by. So here the ratio between a vehicle a unit distance cost and the opportunity cost of not visiting this bin actually softly sets that how much we are willing to make an extra detour to collect a bin that is close by. And in the optimization perspective too, our main goal is to minimize the must-go bins, so maximize service level, and on top of it, as much as the budget allows, we might as well visit these optional bins next to that. And we, of course, have the common problem constraints, as I mentioned previously. So I need to wrap up slowly, I think. I did not include any numeric results. And also, as I mentioned, this is still an ongoing work. I have some results for some parts and some results for not yet for all of the parts. But I want to mention about our main findings. So firstly, the idea is to consider and find a balance and trade-off between these two conflicted criteria, collection cost and service levels. But by allowing these optional bins to visit, which have no impact on the service level at the current planning horizon and even increase the collection cost, we actually increase our chances to stick to our plan in the future. And if we keep doing this for, let's say, 3 months of simulation, we see that the more we stick to our plan, we actually preserve our balance of this collection cost and service levels. And the second thing that we observed is that the traditional rolling horizon principle, also with the limitations of the planning horizon, if we solve it every day with the new information coming for the next day, then we also have a lot of plan changes so frequently then it could maybe not really necessary. So what we thought is that, yes, okay, now we are looking 1 day more ahead, but it's still a couple of days ahead and it might still change in the meantime. So should we really update our decisions for today just because we expect a new overflow 3 days later? So that's why we thought, and since it might still change, we thought it's actually better to preserve this balance once again, that we do a conditional reoptimization. So regardless of the next day that's just opened up due to the rolling horizon, we just check whether it needs to be done today, whether we need to do a reoptimization today or not, so that we can stick to the plan otherwise. So overall, for both of the optimization perspectives in our experiments, what we observed is that without the optional bins and this conditional reoptimization, but the traditional rolling horizon principle, we could not keep this balance, because then the results were not behaving as we would want. You increase the allowed overflows, for instance, but then you get very much different results which are not behaving in the way that you would expect. So what we observed by having these two ideas, we can actually observe solutions that are more coherent, where we could actually have a solution with a better service level and a higher collection cost, or the other way around, a slightly smaller service level, but also a slightly smaller collection cost. So we could see actually solutions that are more desired, and overall we can obtain solutions compared to the traditional fixed collection systems better in terms of both criteria. And the trade-off is, of course, depends on the service level requirements and this ratio between vehicle usage and the distance-related costs. So that was a bit to wrap up what we did. And for the next steps, what we want to do is also consider the case where there is partial sensor coverage. So not all these bins have a sensor. And we also want to look for some strategies to where to place these sensors to still able to do efficient routing and also use this information. That was all for my presentation. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dilay. We will get the questions and comments at the end. So we will have Zehra Naz as our next presenter. Let me introduce her short bio. All right. Zehra Naz is a postdoctoral researcher at Technical University of Munich School of Management. She completed her PhD in 2024 at the Department of Industrial Engineering, Bilkent University in Turkey, my alma mater. Her research centers on addressing logistics challenges in uncertain environments with a particular emphasis on humanitarian and healthcare applications. So Zehra Naz.
Let me share my screen. I guess you can see my slides.
Yes.
Okay. So today I will talk about a fair allocation of in-kind donations in post-disaster phase. So after disasters, people usually prefer to donate gifts in kind as opposed to cash assistance. And there are many reasons behind it. For example, it is, from their perspective, it is more convenient, and they usually have a better idea on how it will be used when it reaches the affected area. This huge percentage of in-kind donations introduces some logistical challenges to our humanitarian supply chain. We need to collect, process, and store these donations, and at the end, we need to distribute them to disaster victims. So this system is usually multi-actor. We have NGOs, individuals, and governmental organizations, and they don't usually communicate with each other. This introduces a high risk of demand-supply mismatch in this problem. And this can yield service applications or material convergence. And as in with many humanitarian problems, we usually face with multiple objectives. We want to cover the demand as much as possible, of course, in an accessible and reliable way, but we want to be also fair towards the disaster victims. It's a main principle of humanitarian operations. But the thing with fairness is that the definition is really subjective, so it is very hard to quantify it in mathematical models. But that's our aim in this study. So let's define our problem. We are allocating a relief item, which is urgent, consumable, and non-perishable. A typical example I like to give here is bottled water, which is widely used after disaster as a reliable source of clean water. And we assume that we receive this supply, the donations, periodically. So this is a multi-period problem. This is our relief network. We have our shelter sites, our demand nodes. And each time period, we have this supply that we need to distribute. And we do this by using a set of mobile facilities. We call them points of distribution. They are basically large trucks, and that's how we can relocate them in each time period. They are also limited in capacity and also in number. So in this problem, we don't consider routing decisions. We don't visit each shelter site individually. We expect people from shelter sites to come to these points and receive their allocated donations. And for this reason, we impose a service distance requirement here. And for security reasons, we don't allow inventory in our facilities. But shelter sites can keep extra items to be used in future time periods. So how do we integrate fairness? Actually, in most of the literature, it is considered as a single-dimensional concept. Most of the studies focus either on quantity or time aspect of it, such as minimizing the maximum shortage or minimizing the longest waiting time. But in a post-disaster setting, if we are allocating an urgent item, we need to consider both of these aspects. And there's a way to do this. There's this concept called deprivation cost, and it aims to measure a population's suffering when facing shortage of a critical item. So it takes both deprived amount and deprivation time as its inputs. In our study, deprived amount is the amount of unmet demand for each shelter site. And we define deprivation time as the number of consecutive time periods a demand node experiences shortage. This definition here is important because when you think about it, if you lack water for 2 days, your suffering for the second day will be much higher than your suffering for the first day, right? So that's why we wanted to penalize this number of consecutive periods with shortage. So this is how we calculate the deprivation cost. It's just a small example with one shelter site. And the demand of this shelter site is 1 unit. We fail to meet this demand except for period 5. Okay, and this is the deprivation cost of this shelter site. It is the amount of accumulated shortage until we observe a full demand satisfaction. And when we observe that, it resets to 0. Okay, but this reset, it does not make up for the suffering we caused in earlier time periods, right? And so to account for this irreversible effect, we consider the accumulated deprivation cost over time periods. And with that being said, using deprivation cost itself may fail to ensure equity. It can yield unfair solutions. So that's why we include a min-max approach here. We minimize the maximum deprivation cost experienced by the shelter sites. So we have our location allocation inventory model with relocation decisions. And to account for accessibility, we introduce another objective, which is the total distance traveled by the disaster victims. So we have this bi-objective model. We apply this to a real data set of Kartal district in Istanbul. And we solve our bi-objective model with using epsilon constraint method. This is the Pareto frontier we obtained. Here we can clearly see the trade-off between these two objectives, right? And let's take a closer look. This is our payoff table, and it shows how much we lose from each objective when we only optimize the other one. So let's look at this end of the Pareto front. This is the solution. This is the point where we only optimize the total distance objective and we completely ignore the other one. So cost of doing so is significantly high, as you can see here. And we also have some compromising solutions, right? This is, let's consider this point, for example. It shows us that if we are willing to make this marginal sacrifice from the total distance objective, we can significantly improve deprivation cost objective, right? It's the sacrifice we made is around 3%. We can consider it as near optimal maybe, and we improve the other objective by 25%. Okay. We also have some more balanced solutions. Let's consider this area, for example. The Pareto optimal points we have in this area shows us that we can improve deprivation cost objective by 50% if we are willing to sacrifice 10% from the other objective. So overall, this small trade-off analysis shows us that instead of only considering an efficiency-based objective, we should always account for equity. Because in optimistic cases, such as this one, we can get near optimal or even optimal solutions based on the other objective, which has a very higher level of equity. So as a result, in this study, we capture equity as a multidimensional subject, a multidimensional concept with both quantity and time aspects. And we quantify it in a multi-period setting and analyze how it evolves over time. And we also have mobile facilities. We update location decisions, which gives us operational flexibility. And our case study actually showed us that by integrating this dynamic location decisions, we can, for a fixed value of deprivation cost values, we can achieve it by much less transportation cost values. And lastly, we apply this deprivation cost concept in a bi-objective setting and analyze the trade-off between different objectives. Actually, we have other bi-objective models in this study, but for the sake of time, I only included this one. And for future work, we are now working on some numerical analysis and to analyze the price of fairness. And we, using the solutions we obtained from the case study, we want to develop some easy to apply and easy to communicate location policies for both location and allocation. And lastly, of course, a natural extension to this problem is that it is uncertain, right? In terms of both supply and demand. And we are already working on this as well. So I think that's all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Zeyhanas. And thanks to all of the 3 Young Women for OR awardees. They gave excellent talks. And now we want to proceed with our subject matter expert, Walter Gutjahr. Let me introduce Walter, my colleague and collaborator, actually. Just a second. Okay, I had a few problems, sorry. Yes, Professor Walter Gutjahr received his doctoral degree in mathematics from University of Vienna. And after a career in industrial software engineering management at Siemens Corporation, he returned to University of Vienna, where he became a full professor of applied mathematics and computer science. At the moment, he is retired, but still active in research. And his research interests include multi-criteria decision analysis, stochastic optimization, project management and scheduling, healthcare management, and humanitarian logistics. So all of the talks discussed here fall into the expertise of Walter. He has published more than 120 peer-reviewed articles and serves as a department editor of Operations Research Spectrum Journal and as a member of the editorial boards of several other journals. So it's a pleasure to have him here. Yes, Walter.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting event, and thanks a lot for the great presentations we saw today and here today. I would like to, I will be as quick as possible. I think I should not spend more than 10 minutes, I guess, for comments, and these are mainly questions rather than comments. Let me please share my what I prepared. Oh, it's not. Okay, here it is. Yes, concerning the first presentation, I liked it very much, and I think it's a really very important line of research, and it is not restricted in any case to the special topic of home health care. I think it's quite general for almost all applications of fairness concepts and of equity concepts in operations research. We have at least these 2 stakeholder groups. We have those that provide a certain service and those that receive a service. For example, in humanitarian logistics, we have the humanitarians, NGOs, or governmental organizations on the one side, and on the other side, the beneficiaries, the clients. So this is always an aspect, and I think it's very valuable to come up with methodological approaches to deal with this issue. Concerning the representation of fairness, you started here with the min-max measure, as you explained it, also called the Rawlsian measure. And this is, of course, the first thing one would do in any case. And it's valuable in its own right, of course. But my suggestion is nevertheless, and maybe you have thought about it yourself, to extend it also to fairness measures which are frequently applied, for example, in empirical investigations in economics, such as my personal preferences are these Gini index-based measures, because the Gini index is so ubiquitous and so frequently applied in economic statistics that it would be good to have to align this to what is done in operations research. But there, of course, are also other possibilities. Recently, some people used the conditional value at risk as a fairness measure, and there's both types have the advantage that it can still be linearized, which is often seen as a main advantage of the min-max approach, that you can do it within mathematical programming, but you can also do this by Gini-based indices, for example, so that the whole power of mathematical programming solvers will still be available, also this approach. This does not hold anymore for prioritarian concepts such as alpha fairness. They have their own advantages. In any case, my suggestion would be to extend the investigation also to these more complex fairness measures. Chen and Hooker have given a nice survey on fairness, different fairness quantifications in optimization.
Yeah.
There's an issue which I would also be interested in knowing how it would look like in your application, namely how high is the price of fairness in the application you have. You compared fairness measures between different stakeholders, nurses, patients, and so on. But one could also compare what is the quantity you achieve if you apply a fairness measure to a certain objective, for example, the late service time, and you get your optimal solution, and then you have to pay a price for it, of course, because the efficiency, the effectiveness measured, for example, in the sum of all late service times will be reduced at least slightly. And it would be interesting to know how large is this gap in your special applications. A last remark on your talk would be, according to our own experience with nurse scheduling, which is already some time ago now, nurses, the work satisfaction of nurses is improved if they are given the opportunity of taking part actively in the schedule generation. So they would like to negotiate on schedules, they would like to exchange assignments and so on. And I did not deal with this issue on a methodological level, but I could imagine that methods from game theory, cooperative game theory, might be useful in this context. And this holds, of course, also in general to any multi-actor systems. A straightforward or natural approach to an analysis of such systems is the game theoretic approach. Okay, thanks again for your nice presentation. Let me turn now to the second talk. Okay. I also liked this presentation very much, and I find it also very important from a practical point of view, of course, first of all, but it's also interesting from a theoretical point, which you did not stress too much in your work, because it is, of course, application oriented, and this is good. This is quite clear. But to me, it also raises some rather theoretical or methodological questions, which are also maybe of interest. The first thing is you describe these two problem versions, minimizing costs under service guarantees and maximizing service levels under cost budget. And to me, this already indicates the next direction of research, which could be to determine the entire Pareto frontier, the efficient frontier, because you can, if you have the programs who solve the one or who solve the other one, no matter which one you can solve, then you can apply them repeatedly and get in this way the efficient frontier, which may be interesting to the practitioner also, because she or he can then select from the frontier the preferred solution. It's completely clear to me that this is computationally rather demanding and maybe also even infeasible for runtime reasons, but it would be nice to see the Pareto frontier for your problem. Another question.
We had some companies, and they also mentioned themselves that they are more interested in the two sides. That's why we didn't go into it.
So okay, so from the application point of view, they were satisfied with this. Okay. Yeah. Did you consider the approach of Markov decision processes to model your dynamic optimization problem? Maybe it's also a rather theoretical issue, and it will possibly not work, at least not within reasonable runtime for the applications, but it might provide a yardstick for evaluating your algorithms at small instances.
I haven't tried, but
of course the obstacle are runtimes, and that one usually faces a state space explosion, so that one can only solve small instances, but it may contribute to showing that your algorithms are really good. So this would be a suggestion. Yes, I think I will stop at this point in order not to spend too much time.
Thank you for the suggestion.
Thank you very much again for your presentation. Yeah, also the third talk was very interesting to me. It's about a combination of this topic of fairness with the concept of deprivation costs. And my first question is already answered. You already mentioned that you did something similar as we did it in our paper from 2018, which was an analysis, a reanalysis of the Nepal 2015 earthquake with respect to fairness of the supply of the victims. And you already mentioned that you applied, so to say, a fairness concept on top of the deprivation cost concept, which is of course necessary because minimizing total deprivation without taking the fairness into account by some specific function will usually, as you mentioned, not lead to fair solution, or can lead to even very unfair solution. What do you think about the deprivation cost concept as such? Do you think it's already quite mature? I'm not quite sure, because it is seen in the literature in two versions. This is the first original version, deprivation cost, as proposed by Holguin Veras and co-workers, and deprivation level, which is suggested by Chinese researchers. And both seem to have still some drawbacks. The drawback of the original version is that it's a monetary measure, but $5 to be paid for a bottle of water in a disaster can mean completely different things for someone who is rich and for someone who is poor. So for me, there remains a slight degree of dissatisfaction with measuring suffering in this way. Deprivation level tries to overcome this drawback, but on the other hand, it's a measure, which is not additive. So one cannot take averages. One cannot do stochastic optimization or something like that. So I would be interested in your opinion about that. My third comment, is about representation of uncertainty. You already mentioned this issue yourself, and so I won't go into details. And maybe you also are aware of the problems connected with it, especially if one combines a multi-objective model with a stochastic, with a two-stage stochastic programming model. It becomes already conceptually very, very difficult and tricky. We used chance constraints in a work with Sibel, and this is conceptually easier. But as soon as you go into the two-stage programming world, it becomes difficult. So if at some time you will have solutions, I would be very interested to know about them. Yeah, and by the way, congratulations to the really great reviews on humanitarian facility location and uncertainty, and to the more recent review on humanitarian logistics, how fair is fairness. Both are very helpful. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much again also for your talk.
Thanks a lot for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walter. And I want to remind that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available in the YouTube channel of Wisdom Forum.